Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight we're going to be talking about curses. Not curses as in swear words, but curses as in when somebody makes bad things happen. Curses have been around for thousands of years. People get mad at each other for whatever reason, and they say bad things are going to happen. I was at work late one night, and we had brought in a group of gypsies who were all in the United States illegally. And not the folks that ride around on horse-drawn wagons and wear fancy clothes. No, these people dressed like everybody else, but they acted kind of strange. Kind of strange as in they would not tell the truth for any reason, and they like to steal things. Well, one of our agents said something to one of the women, who then pulled her eyelid down while looking in his direction. And then she began mumbling something in a strange language under her breath. And this went on for a few minutes. The next day, somebody stole his car, and his girlfriend left him. Now, then his hair began to fall out. Was this a curse or just some really bad luck? Well, he'd been losing his hair for a while, but he went from having a lot of hair to hardly any. At least she did not say thinner, since the guy kept getting pudgier and pudgier all the time. Or maybe she did say pudgy, I don't know. I didn't understand what she was saying, because it was in some bizarre language. My favorite Halloween movie is Hocus Pocus. I watch it about 10 or 15 times each October. Kind of like some kind of a weird ritual that I do. As the Sanderson sisters are about to be hung, Winifred announces she is placing a curse on the town. Well, it takes a few years for the curse to be fulfilled, but then it was written that way for the story. Well, here are a few curses I found out about. I only included some because there are so darn many out there I didn't have time to do a whole lot. I skipped the big ones because they're on TV all the time. So, if you watch the History Channel, you probably are familiar with the Curse of Oak Island. They keep saying 7 men must die before the secret will be revealed. The thing is, nobody knows who said this. I read the book, Curse of Oak Island, by Randall Sullivan. He dug and he searched to find out where the curse came from. Nobody knows when or where it was created. It was just accepted as being the curse covering whatever is buried at the bottom of the money pit. The History Channel wanted to make the most of a good thing, so they came up with the Curse of Confederate Gold. There's no curse involved that I can see, but they are spending a lot of time and money looking for that huge pile of missing treasure. Pele is the goddess of fire and volcanoes who resides in the crater of Kilauea on the Hawaiian island. There are numerous stories equating Pele's wrath to volcanic eruptions and calamitous lava flows. This awe-inspiring display of power has resulted in respect for Pele that has far outlived all of the other Hawaiian gods. Even today, native Hawaiians and New Island residents will leave gifts of gin, berries, red flowers for Madame Pele to show respect and ensure good luck. Even those who don't believe like to err on the side of caution. It's better to be safe than sorry. Pele has long been revered as the island's matriarch. She protects her island and her children, and will take revenge on anyone who disrespects her. And just how do you show disrespect? How about removing something that belongs to her? Pele views the lava rocks as being her children. Anyone who takes something from the volcano will incur the wrath of Pele. Things will happen to you, like your pets will die, or friends and family will die, or they'll leave you for no known reason. You may become horribly sick, or those close to you may develop unusual illnesses. The bad luck will continue to follow you around for years until you take steps to appease Pele. And how do you do this? Anything you have removed from the volcano has to be returned. The post office in the Hawaiian town of Hilo receives packages all the time to a point they're piling up in the back room. Parcels have been mailed by tourists that visited Hawaii and took a souvenir rock or some sand or some shells or other things from the national park. Once back home, when things began to go south, the tourists became desperate to send them back and end the curse. Some of the packages arrive with notes such as, "Please return this to the beach," or "Tell Pele I'm sorry." So if you're flying to Hawaii or you have friends visiting the island, tell them no rocks or beach sand. Take only photographs and leave only footprints. In Japan, Colonel Sanders' Kentucky Fried Chicken has become very popular. It has become a Christmas tradition in many families. When I was young, KFC restaurants had a statue of the Colonel up on the roof. In Japan, many restaurants have statues out front to welcome the hungry. The name fan comes from the word fanatic. Some folks get way too excited when their team wins or loses. When the underdog team, the Hanshin Tigers, won the championship in 1985, the fans ran through the streets, celebrating by destroying other people's property. Some boneheads decided to throw a Colonel Sanders statue into the Dottenboro River. Really, does this sound like fun, or does it sound like stupidity? Following this vandalism, the Tigers went on a losing streak, as in 18 years of losing. The fans began to look for a reason for this bad luck. Witnesses who had cheered on the theft and submergence of the Colonel's statue began to reason that the bad luck had started right after the incident. This led to the belief that the Colonel had placed a curse on the Tigers because the fans had stolen his statue. Since Harlan Sanders had died in 1980, it would be his spirit that had actually placed the curse. Some fans believed the team would never win another Japanese series until the statue had been recovered. The Tigers even made it to the Japanese series 3 times, only to lose in 2003, 2005, and 2014. The fans went so far as to begin searching the river bottom, trying to recover the stolen statue. They worked long and hard to appease the spirit of the Colonel and bring good luck back to their team. They showed up in droves to apologize to the manager of the store, hoping this would make the curse go away. No such luck. In 2009, some divers found what they thought was a barrel at first on the bottom of the river. As they worked to remove the unknown item, they began to suspect maybe it was a body. Then they realized that they had found a statue. The colonel was brought up from the bottom of the river. Once he was on land, they discovered he was still missing his left hand and his glasses were not on his face. The statue was placed back in front of the restaurant with much fanfare, but the curse is still with the team. The fans believe the curse will only be lifted once the entire statue is back safe and sound and in one piece. Today, the managers of KFC restaurants move the statues inside during any playoff games to avoid any more nastiness from the fanatics who go nuts whether their teams win or lose. I like our dog Mark, as in Mark Twain. We take him to the park and he gets to go camping with us. I'd never consider taking him to a movie or a baseball game. I don't think he'd bother even watching. Heck, he doesn't even watch TV. He just lays on the floor asleep. 1945, William Sinise bought season tickets to the Chicago Cubs baseball games for himself and his best friend Murphy. Murphy was a goat. During Game 4 of the World Series, William and Murphy got in line to watch the game. As they approached the ticket taker, William was told that Murphy was no longer welcome in Wrigley Field. Since this was the fourth game, this would mean that the GOAT had been watching the previous games with no problem. For some odd reason, someone had decided no more GOATs in the stands, even if they were holding season tickets. Some say management just went a little too far, and others say that the other spectators were complaining about Murphy smelling bad. William Sinise got mad. He got really mad. He placed a curse on the Chicago Cubs as saying they would never win a National League pennant after throwing Murphy out of the stadium. Well, the curse seemed to stick. The Cubs would manage to win enough to play in the pennant game, only to lose the pennant. Prior to his death on October 22, 1970, Billy Sinise himself attempted to lift the curse. He proclaimed the curse was no longer there, but he failed to remove it. His nephew, Sam Sinise, visited Wrigley Field with a GOAT on several occasions in an attempt to break the curse. He was there with a GOAT on opening day 1984 and again in 1989, both years in which the Cubs went on to win their division. 1994, Sam Sinise went again with a GOAT to stop a home losing streak, and in 1998 for the wild card tiebreaker game, which the Cubs won. 2003 was the Chinese Zodiac year of the GOAT. A group of fans traveled to Houston with a GOAT named Virgil Homer. They attempted to gain entrance to Minute Maid Park, home of the Astros, who were the division rivals of the Cubs at the time. After they were denied entrance, they unfurled a scroll and read a proclamation stating they were reversing the curse. The Cubs won the division that year, but then came within 5 outs of playing in the World Series. They lost to the Florida Marlins, and the Cubs then lost the following game and the series. In 2008, a Greek Orthodox priest was brought in during the 2008 playoffs. He sprinkled holy water in and around the Cubs' dugout. Well, this didn't lift the curse. 2011, a social enterprise called Reverse the Curse went around giving goats to families in developing countries. The families got the goats, but the curse stayed with the Cubs. You really had to be a die-hard fan to root for the Cubs during any pennant game. They would show up with all manner of good luck charms and prayers, only to watch as their team lost. Then, in 2016, on the 46th anniversary of William Sinise's death, the Cubs were up against the Los Angeles Dodgers. In what some say was a miracle, the Cubs won 5-0, winning the pennant. The Cubs then defeated the American League champion Cleveland Indians 8-7, winning the 2016 World Series. Was the curse finally lifted, or did it simply lose its hold after so many years? Some will tell you there's no such thing as curses. I would rather not take a chance. George Herman Ruth, Jr., was born in 1895 at 216 Emery Street in Pigtown section of Baltimore, Maryland. 1914, Ruth signed a professional baseball contract with Jack Dunn, who owned and managed the minor league Baltimore Orioles. Since Ruth was so young, the other players began to call him the Babe. The name stuck and George became known as Babe Ruth, or the Bambino. 1914, Jack Dunn bought Babe Ruth to the Baltimore Orioles. Brought, not bought, to the Baltimore Orioles. Later in the season, Babe's contract was sold to the Boston Red Sox. He was brought on as their pitcher. During the next 3 years, Babe went on to be the most successful left-handed pitcher, winning 65 games. While Babe was with the Red Sox from 1914 to 1919, they won 3 World Series titles, and Babe was a key player in winning each of these championships. At first, Babe was known for his pitching ability, but he slowly gained a reputation as a hitter. He would still pitch 12 games and several innings in between, but hitting the ball became his strong suit. He hit 29 home runs in one season. And he was a bit of a showman, too. He didn't just step up to the plate and swing a bat. He entertained the crowd. 1920, the Red Sox owner, Harry Frazee, decided to sell Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees for $100,000 in cash and a $300,000 loan. To Frazee, the baseball team was just something to make money. He wasn't really into the game, and he seldom even watched. Baseball wasn't a very cultured activity. The stage was where it was at, and in order to raise money to produce a stage play called No No Nanette, Frazee let Babe Ruth go to another team. While the play was a success, when Babe Ruth's contract was sold in 1920, the Boston Red Sox had won 5 World Series titles, more than any other major league team. Up to that point, the Yankees had never won. When Babe Ruth arrived with the Yankees in 1920, they turned into a winning team. The Yankees have been the World Series 37 times, and they have won 26 of those. 4 of these titles were with Babe Ruth. The Red Sox suddenly found themselves at the other end of the game. After selling Babe Ruth to the Yankees, the Red Sox did not win another championship for 86 years. The inability for the Red Sox to win is called the Curse of the Bambino, which means babe, as in Babe Ruth. Baseball isn't the only sport with curses being handed around. In the rest of the world, football is what we call soccer. Well, think about it. In America, the ball isn't kicked all that much. It should be called handball, but, well, that name's already taken. As soccer, the only guy that gets to use his hands is the goalie, so the name football really does apply. They don't sock the ball anyway, they kick it with their feet. Chile, October 30th, 2001. A football team decided to use magic to bring themselves up from the bottom. They hired a witch to help them keep from being demoted to the second division of the Chile Soccer League. The Deportes Arica, or Sports Arica, were having a run of bad luck. And thinking that maybe there was a curse on the team, they brought in a witch to do away with the curse and to bring them some wins. They hired Ileana Marino to cast out evil spirits from the dressing room, the stadium, and even the players' kit. The witch used rituals involving candles, smoke to purify the team before each kickoff. Defender Marcelo Munoz said, "When you're at the bottom, you'll do anything to improve your position." The team holds a collection to pay for the witch's services. They pass the hat around and everybody puts a little money in there and she gets whatever has been accumulated. Winger, or outside midfield, Francisco Campos said, "We decided to give it a go, even though a few of us didn't really have much faith in stuff like that." The team began to believe her spells were working. They won 2 matches right after her visit. The one time after this the witch wasn't hired, the game was a draw. We're convinced she's doing something right, so now we're trying to talk her into coming with us to every game. If we carry on like this, we'll be pushing for promotion next year, he added. Soccer teams around the world are always pushing the limits to try to gain the advantage over their opponents. In Zimbabwe in Africa, it appears they're using some sort of witchcraft and juju to gain the upper hand. Some of the items used are river pebbles, hair, blood, bones, and feathers from animals. The team, known as Caps United, began claiming that the How Mine team used witchcraft on them during an important match in November. The Caps United said that they had somehow checked out their opponent's dressing room 15 minutes into the game. In other words, they broke in. The investigators said they entered the opponent's locker room and they found strange objects, as well as bottles laid out in an 11-man formation. There were burning candles strategically placed around the room. Other accusations included clubs sprinkling goalposts with urine and some players smearing themselves with herbal potions. The How Mine team won the contest on November 10th, and this earned them a spot in the Premier League finals and a chance to win $200,000. Felani Nkube, the coach of the How Mine, says he's a devout Christian, and he says he does not use any type of magical powers to help his club win games or to frighten their opponents. Well, the soccer officials in Zimbabwe took the complaints from Cap United seriously, and they began an investigation into whether or not witchcraft or magic was employed to win the game. The officials also wanted to know why and how Caps United had broke into the dressing room of the Howe Mine team during the game. They're more upset with the break-in than with the use of magic. According to the officials in Zimbabwe, the old legislation that suppresses witchcraft hasn't been enforced or repealed since the nation gained its independence in 1980. However, the laws are enforced if witchcraft is used in human murder cases or if human organs have been removed from bodies during ancient tribal rituals. Because witchcraft isn't really suppressed, it's reportedly pretty common in soccer league in the sub-Saharan African region. One of the top soccer officials in Zimbabwe, who wanted to remain anonymous, said, "It is part of a belief system in Africa, but it is taboo to speak about it. Juju is rampant. It's part of the game." George Candiero, who is the leader of the Zimbabwe National Traditional Healers Association, claimed that losing clubs often visit his organization to find a good medicine or a remedy that can be used against their opponents. Also, he said, some players pay visits to local healers to inhale certain types of herbs and smoke before the games. In addition, some of them even spend the night in houses that are filled with ancestral spirits, since it's believed that they will guide them. Some of the most common types of juju charms include parts of snakes, owls, lizards, sheep, hyena, and crocodiles. Some of these items are often hidden in the grounds of the opposing team. To combat this, the opposition will hire female witches, as they can find these sources of witchcraft, and then they can neutralize the spells that have been cast. It's said that the best way to cancel out witchcraft is to sprinkle baboon urine behind the net, in the player's tunnel, or on the pitch itself. Where the heck do you find bottles of baboon urine? I guess you can buy just about anything. So the effort to win a soccer match begins long before the players enter the stadium. Whoever can afford the better witch can win the game. I wonder if this has been tried here in the United States yet. Another way to ward off evil spells is to scatter coarse salt around the game, and for the players to rub their hands and feet with herbal potions or animal and human urine. Because of this, many players do not shake hands with the opposition team before the kickoff. On that pleasant little note, I am going to take a break, drink some coffee, and play some commercials. Don't go away, we'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Are you taking care of your skin, or are you going to wait and see how time treats you? Take care today by contacting Lourdes James, Independent Beauty Consultant, at 956-723-3019. Don't let time get the best of you. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. Coffee, nectar of the gods. And at the Organic Man Coffee Trike, you'll find coffee made the right way, one delicious cup at a time. Stop on by 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. If you need to squint and hold things out at arm's length to see them, maybe you should get your eyes checked. Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, is right across from the Embassy Suites. Stop squinting and start seeing. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. And next time you're at the Organic Man Coffee Trike, tell them you'd like to try the Short Bus Blend. It's really good. The beans are bigger than any beans I've ever seen, and they taste really good the way he cooks them. In England, they have pubs, or public houses. This is the equivalent of a bar here in the U.S. Thomas Busby was the petty criminal back in the 1600s, and he was the owner of the Busby Stoop Inn, which is located in Kirby Wiske, a small village near the town of Thirsk in North Yorkshire. His partner in crime was his father-in-law, Daniel Ottey. The two got into an argument over some unknown subject, and Thomas stormed away in a heated rage. Later that night, he returned to his pub for some drinks. As Thomas entered the pub, probably already close to inebriation, he spotted his father-in-law sitting in his favorite chair next to the fireplace. Being drunk and mad, Thomas insisted that Daniel get out of his chair. Daniel said no and stayed put. Thomas stormed out the door, still in a rage. He had a reputation for being a nasty drunk, and so later, when the police found Daniel Ottey's body laying in the woods, their first suspect was Thomas. Thomas admitted to killing his father-in-law using a hammer. Thomas Busby was sentenced to hang. Back then, the judge would say, "You will be hanged by the neck until dead." I hear folks ask, why, since you're being hung, wouldn't death be pretty much immediate? Well, not back then. The English didn't use the drop when hanging a criminal. Instead, the rope was tied around the subject's neck, with the knot being at the back, and they were then lifted off their feet. Death might take a while, up to 20 minutes. In the United States, the long drop was combined with the hangman's knot, causing a twist to the head which breaks the neck. That's why there's the long series of loops creating the noose. If you ever watch a movie, and they show some criminal in England back in the, say, 1600s, and they're placing a noose around their neck, and it's got that long, coiled rope knot, the people that made the movie don't know what they're doing. That's just me. I like history a little too much. Even with a date with the executioner, Thomas Busby was allowed to walk around town. He went to the pub for one last drink. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, Busby finally said, "Anyone that sat in his favorite chair was cursed to die a terrible death, and soon." He was then led across the street to a makeshift gallows. Once he'd stopped kicking, his body remained on display for the remainder of the week. Good. Just think of the smell. Just think about riding into town and seeing some guy's dead body hanging on the side of the street. welcome to town. Since that time, many people have reported seeing the ghost of Thomas Busby at or near the hangman's gibbet, with a noose still around his neck. But it's the curse of his favorite chair that has become the subject of both folklore and mystical intrigue. There are verifiable accounts of a good number of people who sat in Busby's haunted chair in the years that followed and then met with sudden death. In the late 1800s, a chimney sweep and his friend were sitting in the pub. The sweep, who apparently had occupied Busby's stooped chair, was found dead the next morning. He was on the gatepost next to the hangman's gibbet. During World War II, pilots from the nearby airbase would congregate at the pub. After some weeks, they began to notice that pilots that sat in one chair in particular would fly into battle and never come back. All the pilots began to avoid sitting in that one chair. Mr. Earnshaw, who was the landlord of the inn, overheard two RAF pilots talking about the famous chair. He watched as they took turns sitting in the chair as if tempting death. The two left the pub, and both pilots were killed when their car struck a tree. Motorcyclists and bicyclists who often stop at the inn for drink were later involved in fatal collisions with automobiles. Two bricklayers decided to try it, and that afternoon the bricklayer that sat in the chair fell to his death. A roofer who sat in it died after the roof he was working on collapsed. The cleaning woman, who stumbled into the chair while mopping, later was killed from a brain tumor. The owner of the pub had the chair hung on a peg on the wall, but folks would still dare each other to pull it down and try their luck. The chair was moved to the basement, and eventually it was moved to a museum. Today the chair is on display at the Thirsk Museum, but nobody is allowed to sit in it. Rasputin was born January 21st, 1869, a peasant in a small town of Pokrovsky. I'm not even going to try that one. He was born in Siberia. In 1897, Rasputin developed a renewed interest in religion, and he left his hometown to go on a pilgrimage. According to some sources, Rasputin left the village to escape punishment because he had helped steal a horse. Other sources suggest that he had a vision of the Virgin Mary. At the time, Rasputin was married, and he had one child at home and another one on the way. He would spend the years that followed living in Stranik, or a holy wanderer, or a pilgrim. Not living in, but as a Stranik. He would leave his hometown for months or even years at a time to wander the country and visit various holy sites. By the early 1900s, Rasputin had developed a small circle of acolytes, primarily family members and other local peasants, who prayed with him on Sundays and other holy days when he was in his hometown. They even built a makeshift chapel in the basement. Rasputin was still living in his father's home at the time. Okay, he was the first millennial because he was living in his parents' basement. The group held secret prayer meetings at the house. These meetings were the subject of some suspicion and hostility from the village priest and other villagers. It was rumored that the female followers would ceremonial wash Rasputin before each meeting. In other words, there was some nudity involved. The group sang strange songs that the villagers had not heard before, and even Rasputin was said to have joined a religious sect whose ecstatic rituals were rumored to include self-flagellation, that means you're beating yourself with a whip, and sexual orgies. Word of Rasputin's activity and charisma began to spread throughout Siberia during the early 1900s. Sometime between 1902 and 1904, he traveled to the city of Kazan on the Volga River, where he acquired a reputation as a wise and perceptive holy man who could help people resolve their spiritual crises and anxieties. Rasputin met Theophan, who was the inspector of theological seminary, as well as being connected to the St. Petersburg Society. He later served as the confessor to the Tsar and his wife. Theophan was so impressed with Rasputin that he invited him to stay in his home, and he became one of Rasputin's most important and influential friends in St. Petersburg. 1905, Rasputin was introduced to Tsar Nicholas II and his wife Alexandra. Alexei, their fifth child and only male descendant, was afflicted with hemophilia. Any small injury could lead to major problems. Rasputin announced he could save the boy's life during one very bad occasion. Well, Alexei survived, and Rasputin became a favorite amongst the Romanovs, especially the mother Alexandra. Her belief that Rasputin possessed the powers to heal Alexei brought him considerable status and power at court. The Tsar appointed Rasputin as his lamplighter. This was the guy charged with keeping the lamps that burned in front of the religious icons in the palace lit. Thus, Rasputin became a regular in and around the palace, and he was always hanging around the royal family. Alexandra wasn't from Russia. She was German, and many folks thought it was wrong for Nicholas II to have married somebody not from the motherland. As Rasputin's influence of Alexandra increased, many thought he was influencing the Tsar as well. Well, Alexandra would talk to her husband, and he would listen, so anything Rasputin wanted would come about. Rasputin was able to get many of his close friends jobs in the Russian government. During World War I, Rasputin became the focus of accusations of unpatriotic influence at court. The unpopular Tsarina, meanwhile, who was German descent, was accused of acting as a spy for Germany. Rasputin was very much against the war, saying that it was wrong to go to war and kill anyone, no matter what. He expressed an interest in going to the front in order to bless the troops early in the war. The commander-in-chief, Grand Duke Nicholas, a cousin of the Tsar, said that he would hang Rasputin if he dared to show up. Rasputin then claimed he had a revelation that the Russian armies would not be successful until the Tsar personally took command. With this, the ill-prepared Tsar Nicholas II proceeded to take personal command of the Russian army, with dire consequences for both himself and for Russia. Nicholas I had been a bold and popular leader of the army. His son, Nicholas II, just didn't have any ability, and the army didn't much care for him. Being the Tsar didn't stop Nicholas II from running the military right into the ground. While Tsar Nicholas II was away at war, Rasputin's influence over the Tsarina Alexandra increased. He soon became her confidant and personal advisor. He convinced her to fill some government offices with many of his hand-picked candidates. To advance his power further in the highest circles of Russian society, Rasputin cohabitated with upper-class women in exchange for granting political favors. There are also some who say that he and Alexandra were having a fling. Rasputin's first assassination attempt occurred in 1914 when a prostitute named Gusiva stabbed him with a dagger in what was thought to be a mortal wound. Eyewitnesses claimed that as Rasputin's entrails fell from his stomach, Gusiva shouted, "I've killed the Antichrist." Somehow Rasputin managed to survive, but this kind of changed his debonair. Long before Rasputin died, he told the Tsar, "If I am killed by common men, you and your children will rule Russia for centuries to come. If I am killed by one of your stock, you and your family will be killed by the Russian people." Vladimir Pushkevich, God, I wish these people would speak English. Vladimir was an outspoken member of the Duma. A Duma is a Russian assembly with advisors and legislative functions, kind of like Congress, but not that much. November 19th, 1916, Vladimir made a rousing speech in the Duma in which he stated, "The Tsar's ministers who have been taking turns as marionettes, those threads have been taken firmly in hand by Rasputin and the Empress Alexandra. The evil genius of Russia and the Tsarina, who has remained a German on the Russian throne and alien to the country and its people." Felix Yusupov attended the speech, and afterwards he contacted Vladimir, who quickly agreed to participate in the murder of Rasputin. Having decided that Rasputin's influence over the Tsarina had made him a threat to the empire, a group of nobles led by Prince Felix Yusupov, the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, and the right-wing politician Vladimir, that guy, concocted a plan to kill Rasputin on December 30th, 1916. They lured Rasputin to Yusupov's palace. A group of conspirators, including the Grand Duke, Dmitry Pavlovich, and Prince Felix Yusupov, decided it was time to take steps in the right direction. They were going to feed him cakes laced with poison. They're going to give him wine that was also been poisoned. In fact, they put so much poison into the food and the drinks, it was enough to kill 5 people. Rasputin was unaffected. He didn't eat that much of the food, but he did consume a lot of the wine. Instead of falling over dead, Rasputin stood up and he insisted there should be music. He told Yusupov to play the guitar so they could sing. After 2 hours of singing with what should be a dead man, Yusupov invited the other conspirators to do something quick. The men ran into the room and began beating Rasputin with clubs and canes. Then they shot him in the back. Rasputin fell to the floor. He then jumped up to his feet and began to run for the door. So they shot him some more. The men then wrapped his body in carpet and they tossed him into the Neva River. The body was found several days later. When it was examined, Rasputin did not die from the poison, or the beatings, or the 3 gunshots, one of which was to his head. It appeared as if after being dumped into the freezing cold river, Rasputin tried to pull himself from the river. He eventually died by drowning. The curse of Rasputin was that if commoners killed him, the Tsar and his family would rule Russia for generations to come. If, on the other hand, Rasputin was killed by royalty, as in princes or dukes, that sort of thing, the Russian people would kill the Romanovs. Rasputin was buried January 2nd, 1917, in a small church that had been built at another one of those Russian names, Tsarskoye Selo. The funeral was intended only by the royal family and a few of their intimates. Rasputin's wife and children were not invited to his funeral. His daughter did meet with the royal family later. His body was then exhumed and burned by an detachment of soldiers shortly after the Tsar abdicated the throne in March 1917. They wanted to prevent his burial site from becoming a rallying point for supporters of the old regime. Despite the Disney movie, Rasputin was a very close member of the Romanovs and not the evil creature trying to destroy them. In July 17, 1918, the Romanovs were taken to the basement of the Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg, Siberia, where they were shot. A lot of folks call it the Russian Revolution, but it wasn't a revolution. In political science, a revolution is a fundamental and relatively sudden change in political power and political organization which occurs when the population revolts against the government, typically due to perceived oppression or political incompetence. Kerensky became the head of the provisional government in July, and he put down a coup attempt by the army commander-in-chief. The Russian Navy actually overthrew the Tsar and his family and then handed control over to the folks who were already in the government. So since the people did not destroy the government, it was the Navy killed off the Romanovs and then turned the country back over to the government. Later in October, the Soviets waltzed in and took over from the fourth failed provisional government. So it wasn't really a revolution, it was a coup. One day I'm going to die, and I'm going to take you all with me. This was a song sung by Julia Brown. Born in 1845, Julia Brown was... Let me start that one over. Julia Brown was born in 1845. I don't know why I have that written twice in my notes. She grew up learning all she could about voodoo and became a priestess. She lived and worked in New Orleans in 1860s before deciding it was time to move on and find a new home. She chose the village of Frenier in the middle of the Manchac Swamp for some reason known only to her. The village had no doctor, and rather than traveling the great distance to New Orleans to find a doctor, the locals would seek out Julia to be their local healer. To some, this may sound like an odd thing to do, but there are many out there that think checking into a hospital is a weird thing to do. Julia was glad to be their healer and midwife, even seeking new knowledge by reading materials to help her care for other people. It is a bit of a thrill being the one and only person everybody turns to when in need. She would travel the village performing rituals to help with childbirth, fight off infections, and cure illness. The people she helped always recovered quickly, and the locals knew that whatever kind of magic or powers Julia was using was powerful enough to cure just about anything. As time passed, Julia had helped so many people in so many different ways, they slowly began to think of her not so much as a gift, but as a utility. They would show up at all hours insisting she take care of any little thing they wanted. The people of Fernier began to take her for granted. Julia began to dislike many of the people she was helping. She took great delight in scaring them by predicting all manner of bizarre and painful illness about to visit them. The townspeople were terrified, not knowing whether she was foretelling the future or placing a curse on them. Julia always knew when something bad was coming to Fernier, and she passed on just about every bad thing she could to her neighbors. September 28, 1915, Julia made her final prediction. While sitting on her front porch, she began to sing. "One day I'm going to die, and I'm going to take all of you with me." She sang this song over and over all day. People passing by her home would hear her singing, and they just prayed she was just making things up. Helen Schlosser Berg was one of Julia's neighbors. As she had said, Aunt Julia Brown always sat on her front porch and played her guitar and sang songs that she would make up. The words to one of the songs she sang said that one day she would die and everything would die with her. The next day, after singing about everyone dying along with her, Julia Brown passed away. The town became worried, knowing how many times Julia had made a prediction that had come true. Hoping to appease her spirit, the entire town attended her funeral. They all did their best to look properly grieved and say good things about her. As the coffin was being nailed shut, a storm began moving inland from the coast. It was a Category 4 hurricane, and it was bearing down on the town. Being made from wood, every building in town was smashed to pieces and washed away. Of the entire town, there were only 2 survivors. Julia's body was found the next day washed up on the bank of the river, but her coffin was never located. There were so many dead bodies. There were so little places to put them. A mass grave was dug and everybody was just piled in and buried. Despite efforts by developers to rebuild the area, the only thing that remains on the island where Julia Brown once called home is the mass grave where everyone was buried. As a result, the island is believed to be a highly active paranormal hotspot. If you listen carefully, you may even hear the sound of a ghostly voice singing Julia's famous song. If you care to see for yourself, you can take a boat tour through the waters of Manchac Swamp and visit the town where Julia Brown placed her curse. Is the island nation of Haiti cursed? Well, Christopher Columbus landed in Haiti on December 5th, 1492, in an area known as Molay Saint Nicolas. He claimed the island for the crown of Castile. Despite what a lot of folks have been told, he never set foot on the continent. France received the western third and subsequently named it Saint-Domingue, the French equivalent of Santo Domingo, the Spanish colony of Hispaniola, and the name of its patron saint, Saint Dominic. They began shipping in slaves to work in the sugar fields. Many of the slaves managed to hold on to their African religions by disguising it to look like Catholicism. They used the images of the saints, but they renamed them after their own gods. Saint Dominique had been described as one of the most brutal, efficient slave colonies. 1/3 of the newly imported Africans died within a few years. Many slaves died from diseases such as smallpox and typhoid fever. Not all the slave owners were white. There were many black slave owners. Some were the offspring of mixed couplings. Being half French, these kids would be sent to France where they were educated. Then these folks would return to Saint Dominique, where they took their places running the sugar plantations. France enacted the Code Noir, or the Black Code, which was prepared by John Baptiste Colbert and ratified by Louis XIV, which established rules on slave treatment. It also created conditions where slaves could gain their freedom. Inspired by the French Revolution in 1789, the free people of color living in Santo Domingue began demanding their freedom from France. A lot of the slaves refused to get involved on the chance that the people of color were not successful, and France managed to hold on to the island. As the fight for freedom advanced and the black slave owners looked like they would win, the slaves began to support them. In 1792, the French commissioners Saint-Thonax and Paul Virel abolished slavery in the colony. 6 months later, the National Convention, led by Robespierre and the Jacobins, endorsed abolition and extended it to all French colonies. Toussaint Louverture, a former slave and the leader of the slave revolt, drove out the Spanish from Santo Domingo, and when British invaders tried to step in, he chased them off as well. The United States kind of played both sides against each other. Traders would supply both the French and the rebels. Once the French were no longer calling the shots, the free people of color, led by André Rougarde, and the Haitians of African ancestry, led by Louverture, began fighting each other in what is known as the War of the Knives. Many surviving free people of color left the island as refugees, and they wound up living in the area around New Orleans. It is said by many that the only way the revolution was successful against the better trained and better equipped French military was because the rebels had sworn a pact with the devil. Dessalines was proclaimed emperor for life by his troops. At first, he offered protection to the white planters and others. Once in power, he ordered the massacre of most whites without regard to age or gender. He was then assassinated by rivals in 1806. In 1829, President Jean-Pierre Boyer, also a homme de couleur, or a person of color, reunified the island and extended control over the entire western portion of the island. In addition, after Santo Domingo declared itself independent from Spain in November 30th, 1821, Boyer sent forces to take control. He ruled the entire island and ended slavery in Santo Domingo. After Santo Domingo achieved independence from Haiti, it had established a separate nation identity. 1844, Haiti lost control of the eastern two-thirds of the island. 1846, President Richer died after only a few days in power, and he was replaced by an obscure officer, General Faustin Soulouque. Soulouque's first year in power were so messed up by intrigue, the Dominicans were able to reorganize their end of the island and became recognized by France as a new country. Well, Haiti immediately protested, claiming the treaty was an attack on their security. Soulouque decided to invade the eastern half of the island. As Soulouque and his army were about to seize Santo Domingo, word arrived of trouble back in Port-au-Prince. The army was forced to return to Haiti to try to hold on to power in their own country. It seems that any time anyone came to power, they became pig-headed, and then they tried to turn their country into a dictatorship. And in the process, they always managed to kill thousands of people. 1957, Dr. Francis Duvalier was elected president of Haiti. He was known as Papa Doc. He started out being a very popular leader, so the people elected him to be president for life, which in my book is as close to being a dictator as you can get. He screwed up the country, becoming enormously wealthy, while his subjects slipped closer to becoming flat broke. He used a secret police organization known as the Tontons Mouquettes, or the Boogeymen, which maintained order by terrorizing the populace. You would show up to vote during an election. It's not like here in the United States where you step behind a curtain or you're shielded from everybody else. You had two boxes sitting on a table. You'd put your ballot in one of the two boxes, either for Papa Doc or against him. And as you're placing your ballot in the box against Papa Doc, you would have members of the Tontons standing right there, staring at you, holding a machete and a pistol. Who's going to vote against Papa Doc now? Only the crazy. 1971, when Papa Doc died, his son, Jean-Claude Duvalier, stepped into the office of president or dictator. The son became known as Baby Doc. He tried to outdo his father when it came to killing his opponents and terrifying his people. A Baby Doc relied on their Haitians' belief in African gods to keep them in line. He would perform rituals that looked very much like Satan worship. 1986, Baby Doc slipped out of the country and moved to France, where he lived like a king on all the money he had stolen from his people. Baby Doc must have thought the folks living in Haiti were dense, because he returned in 2011 and tried to get re-elected. He wound up being placed in custody, and he had to spend his life in a luxury hotel till he died in 2014. November 1994, Hurricane Gordon brushed up against Haiti, dumping heavy rain and creating flash floods that triggered mudslides. They estimate that 2,200 people were killed by a minor hurricane. In January 2010, the local time, Haiti was struck by a magnitude 7 earthquake. It destroyed most of the island. Millions of dollars were raised by the Red Cross and other so-called non-profit groups, all in the name of helping the people of the island. By the next year, the folks who claimed they were going to help build the island back had only built 6 houses on the entire island. With all of these calamities and all these bad things happening to one small island in the Caribbean, doesn't it just sound as if the entire island has been cursed? How can one country have so much bad luck? I ran out of time before I ran out of curses. I figure everyone knows about King Tut and Hope Diamond and the popular curses that keep showing up on TV. I'll have to do another show on curses soon because, like I said, I only got the very top portion of the ones I could read about. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder 3? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?